Welcome to your ultimate layout guide on YouTube. In this long video, we are going to explain three different kinds of layout systems. We're going to explain dual angle, we're going to explain Storm's VLS system, and we're going to explain the 2LS system for no thumb bowlers. We're going to explain what all of the numbers mean, how to actually lay out your bowling ball using these numbers, and what it'll look like for you either at home or at your pro shop, and answer any other common questions that there are. Like I said, this video is going to be a long one, so make sure to use the chapters that are down below so that you can find exactly what you're looking for. Make sure to save this video so when you're laying out your next ball, you know exactly what kind of numbers you want to put on it. This video took a bit to create, so if you guys want to help support the channel, make sure to drop a subscription and drop a like on the video. It's the best way to support the channel, but let's first get into what you need to start this process. Going into any layout system, you're going to need a couple of different things. Number one is you need your positive axis point. Your positive axis point is like a bowler's fingerprint. This is their unique number of the ball that doesn't actually spin. So when you throw a ball, you see it rotating. We're going to use everyone's favorite Pokeball here. When you see it rotating like this, you see, if you do it right, that white portion is not spinning, just like a bowling ball would. And a bowling ball for the first 30-ish feet has that spot. The positive axis point is that exact spot on your ball. So there are a lot of really good guides on YouTube to be able to figure out how to find your positive axis point, but otherwise talk to your local pro shop. They should be able to help you. They should have the tools necessary to be able to help you find what your PAP is. The next two things you're going to need are a Pro Sect. This is the most common measuring tool that pro shops use. This is made like a half scale for a bowling ball, where you're able to find those exact distances between different numbers, between different places on the ball. This is an absolute necessity when laying out a ball, especially when using the dual angle system. I like to use this thing for pretty much everything, but for dual angle, this is a must. Then for Storm's system, because they use arcs for everything, they actually have their own lightning arc ruler that they use that you'll see in videos when we get into the Storm section. Now, this tool isn't a necessity. It makes it a lot easier to find your layout and to be able to put a layout on a ball, but you can also use a Pro Sect for this. We are going to show a little clip of us using a Pro Sect to find these numbers versus using the Storm lightning arc ruler. I believe the lightning arc ruler is like $20, so if you don't want to spend the money, then you don't have to. The first layout system we're going to get into is the dual angle layout system. This is the most common layout system for everybody in the bowling industry. The only people that really don't use dual angle are a lot of the Storm pro shops or Storm staffers. In general, dual angle will be the most common that you see and the most common that your pro shop will talk to you about. First thing we're going to do is talk about the numbers themselves, and then we'll get into how to actually put a dual angle layout on your ball. First of all, the very first number that you need is going to be the drilling angle. This is going to be an angle generally between 10 and 90 degrees. You don't want to go outside of that because things get a little bit gross. This first number only matters on asymmetrical bowling balls. Now, it does affect your symmetrical motion just a little bit. So if you're somebody who wants to worry about that a little bit, I would recommend using this number no matter what, because there is a lot of evidence that this number doesn't matter for asymmetrical or for symmetrical bowling balls. However, no one has fully come out and shown proof of that in that many ways. So what we're going to do is we're just going to assume that we use this no matter what. This number determines how early or how late the bowling ball is going to roll. So if you put a number closer to 10 degrees on this ball, then it's going to want to hook sooner. If you put a number closer to 90 degrees for this, then it's going to hook later. Generally, what people do is if you have an earlier rolling bowling ball, a phase 2, sublime focus, if you have a mesmerize, something like that, and you want it to hook early, you put a lower number on this bowling ball. If you have a pearl bowling ball, you want to make this number a little bit bigger. Generally, people stay between about 25 degrees and 75 degrees. You don't usually get to those other extremes. So that's what we'll be using in our examples later. The second number that is used is the pin-to-PAP distance. This is used in every single layout system, and this is by far the most important number in all three layout systems. Now, this one's a little tough to explain, so I'll have some visuals on the screen to help out. The pin to PAP distance is really like a bell curve at the end of the day, because this number, this distance, directly correlates to how much flare the ball is going to have. So you have that bell curve with the top being high and the bottoms being a little bit lower. If you're near that middle area where the bell curve is at its highest, that is when you're going to have the most flare of the bowling ball. That actually raises the differential of your bowling ball. The further you get away from that distance, the lower the flare, the lower the differential of your bowling ball is going to be. So the number that is the max flare potential of a ball is between 3.5 and 3 3/4 inches. If you're around that range, then that is the maximum amount of flare that you can put on a bowling ball. The further you get away, the less flare you're going to have. Most layouts are between about 3 3/4 inches and 5 1/4 inches. The closer you get to that 5 1/4 mark, the more your ball is going to hook down lane, but it's going to hook later in general, have less flare. Now, there is another question about short pin layouts. If you go lower than that 3.5 inches, you get towards short pin layout territory. This is something you can do to make your ball really, really mellow down lane. It's going to act more like a urethane-like reaction. Some people really like short pin layouts. Most in the bowling community aren't big fans of it, but it is an option. There's a lot of really good guides on explaining what short pin layouts truly do. For this, we are not going to get into that more niche side because they are so hit or miss. What we're going to do is focus on the upper half of this. So for all of our examples for the pin to PAP distance, we will have them between about 3 3/4 inches and 5 1/4 inches. The final number in the dual angle layout system is the VAL angle. This is the vertical axis line angle. And this number is arguably the second most important number in the dual angle system. And this one determines how quickly your ball is going to react on friction. So this is going to determine how sharp the ball will be when it gets down lane, when it sees friction. This number is another angle, and it's between 10 degrees and 90 degrees. The closer you get to 10 degrees, the quicker your ball wants to react on friction. The closer you get to 90, the slower the ball is going to react on friction. Now, this number actually directly correlates with if the ball is a generic pin up or pin down layout. So when people ask, what is the difference between pin up and pin down? The main difference is how it reacts when it sees friction. So when you have a VAL that is lower, a VAL that is lower, that is when the ball is going to be pin up. That is when you're going to see that ball be a lot quicker on friction. When you get closer to that 90, that's when a ball is going to be usually pinned down, and that's when a ball is going to be slower on friction. A ball that is also closer to 90 is going to hook later as well, where a ball closer to 10 degrees is going to hook earlier. Generally, we like to see our pearl balls be on the lower end of this and our smoother, stronger balls be on the higher end of this, because for a stronger ball, you don't want it to be quick. You want it to be slower, but that means it's going to be better from straighter. The lower VAL angles are going to be better from a little bit deeper on the lane. That explains all of the numbers used in the dual angle layout system. What I will do now is have examples on the screen that you can use to be able to fine tune your ball reaction so you don't have to make up the numbers yourself. These are some common numbers that are used from various bowling companies, except for Storm, to really be able to pick what's going to be best for your ball. Now, you really don't have to choose specific layouts for specific companies. Remember that most bowling balls in 2025 are going to react fairly similarly together. A Brunswick ball and a Storm ball will be close enough where you don't have to put certain layouts on your Brunswick only stuff and your Storm only stuff. So keep that in mind. But we'll have some examples on the screen right now that you can look at that you can use for your own game. Next, let's actually put a layout on a bowling ball. This is going to be very, very beneficial for people who actually work at a pro shop or want to be able to just lay their bowling balls out themselves. What we're going to do here is have us go over to me actually putting a layout on a ball in our pro shop. For this example, we're going to go 30 degrees by 4.5 inches by 30 degrees. We're going to be able to see what this looks like and then see that this ball is definitely going to be pin up. So I also have my PAP that we'll talk about later. It's about 5 inches over and 1.5 inches up. The first thing you'll do is you'll take your Pro Sect and you're going to draw a straight line between either your pin and your mass bias if it's an asymmetrical bowling ball, or the pin and your CG if it's a symmetrical ball. If you're confused on which one is which, the mass bias is going to be the lowest number and the lowest symbol that's on your bowling ball. This is usually some kind of weird symbol from a lot of the companies. For example, the Rotogrip Gremlin just came out, and that ball has a wild mass bias logo. So what you'll need to do is draw a straight line either between the CG, the center of gravity, or the mass bias. Then you're going to put the spine of the Pro Sect. That's going to be the line. I call the spine the middle line that is in between, like kind of cuts the half into a quarter. So you're going to put that spine onto that line that you just created, and you're going to find 30 degrees on the side of it. Then you're going to put a mark on that 30 degrees and draw a line directly from your pin through that 30 degrees. And you can make like a 6-inch-ish line between that pin and through that 30-degree angle. Next up, you're going to put the pin to PAP distance on the bowling ball. What you'll do is you'll put the 0 mark of the Pro Sect onto the pin, and then on that line you just drew, you're going to find whatever your pin to PAP distance is. For us, we're using 4.5 inches. So we're going to mark 4.5 inches from the center of the pin, put a little mark there, and then we'll leave it at that. And finally, we're going to put the VAL angle on the bowling ball. So you're going to go back and put the spine of the Pro Sect onto that pin to PAP line that you just drew. You're going to put the 0 mark of the Pro Sect onto where that pin to PAP distance is. So on that 4.5-inch mark. When you do that, you're going to try to make an N. So by making an N, what I mean is you're going to find the 30-degree mark on the Pro Sect again, and then you're going to make a mark, draw a line between that 30-degree mark and your pin to PAP distance. If you do this correctly, it's going to look like a tiny letter N. And from here, this is where it gets unique. This is where you put your custom PAP on your bowling ball. So for me, like I said, my PAP is 5 inches over and 1.5 inches up. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna reverse all that. So we have our mark, we have our lines. Using that VAL angle line, we are going to go 1.5 inches down that line from the PAP. So from the pin to PAP location. This is going to be able to help us reverse our positive axis point so that we can get this layout specifically for us. So we'll go 1.5 inches down, and then making a perpendicular line to that VAL angle, we're going to go 5 inches across. And finally, we're going to mark that 5-inch location, and that is going to be the center of our grip. So what we're going to do is then make a perpendicular line to the one we just made to where that center of grip was made, and that is going to be our middle of our grip. So then from here, you're going to put your custom fit on your ball, acting like that's the center of your grip. For me, for example, my middle finger is 4.5 inches. It has a total of 4.5-inch span from middle finger to thumb. What I do here is I cut that in half. So I do 2.25 inches. I go 2.25 inches above the center of grip, 2.25 inches below the center of grip to get my middle finger and my thumb distances. And then from there, I put my ring finger distance on the ball, and then boom, you are good to go to drill it with this 30 by 4.5 by 30-degree layout. Moving on, we're going to the Storm VLS layout system. The vector layout system is going to be something that only uses arcs, only uses distances. There are no angles in this actual process. So this is where that Storm Lightning Arc ruler really comes in handy. It is not a necessity, though. A Pro Sect can also be used. Just like dual angle, there are 3 numbers that we are going to care about in this process. Just like in the dual angle layout system, we are going to first explain what the numbers mean. So the 3 numbers we're talking about are, again, the pin to PAP distance, then we have the PSA to PAP distance, and then finally we have the pin buffer distance. These ones are a little more confusing, so make sure to bear with me and watch it a couple times if you have to. First number is going to be the pin to PAP distance. This is by far the most important number in any layout system. And what this number dictates is how much flare the bowling ball is going to have. So if you already watched this section for dual angle, you can skip it because it's going to be the same. That pin to PAP distance determines how much differential and flare the ball will have. And if you want maximum flare potential, you want the highest differential you can out of that core, you want to stick around the 3.5 to 3¾ inch distance range, because the pin to PAP distance is like a bell curve, where that 3.5 to 3¾ inches is going to be the highest part of that bell curve where there's the most differential. The further you get away from that, the lower that differential is going to get. So the higher pin to PAP distance is, when you go above that 3¾ inches, the further you get away, the less flare there will be, the more down lane motion there's going to be from your bowling ball. Generally, these numbers tend to stick between 3¾ inches and 5¼ inches, sometimes 5.5 for some of the really rev dominant guys. But if you get closer to that 5¼ the longer and the sharper your ball will be. If you go less than that 3.5 inches, you get into short pin distance range. This one gets a little bit hairy and niche, and we're not going to fully get into that in this video. Next up is going to be the PSA to PAP distance. This is going to be a distance that determines how early or how late your bowling ball is going to roll. And this number, according to Storm, can be used for symmetrical and asymmetrical layouts, but just like the drilling angle in the dual angle system, this doesn't matter much for symmetrical balls. Yes, you should still try to put something that you want on it, but this isn't going to affect your reaction that much. The other two angles, the other two distances are going to matter much, much more. For this number, you can go anywhere between 1 and 6 inches. And if you get closer to 1 inch, the ball is going to want to hook earlier. You get closer to 6 inches, the ball is going to hook later. This one usually means that between 1 and 3 inches is an earlier bowling ball motion, and between 4 and 6 inches is a later bowling ball motion. So if you want to try to have your ball hook later, try to be closer to that 6-inch range. If you want to hook earlier, be closer to that 1 inch. And finally, we have the pin buffer distance, and this number actually correlates very closely to a VAL angle and dual angle. This number dictates how quickly the ball will transition on friction or how slowly it transitions on friction. This distance is generally between 1 inch and 5 inches. The closer you are to that 1 inch range, the quicker the ball is going to react to friction. The further away you are when you're around that 4 to 5 inch range, the slower the ball will react on friction. I'll have some examples on screen that Storm actually gives for different situations and different bowlers. These are going to be very interesting because some layouts are not feasibly possible with this layout system because you're putting lines together and putting arcs together. Now, make sure to use some of these examples for yourself, or at least understand what your bowling balls are at for a layout so that you can figure out which layouts seem better for you or which ones seem worse. If you want to see a comparison between dual angle and vector, I'd recommend using both on your ball to see where it ends up. But with that, let's actually go to the shop and figure out how to put this VLS layout on your bowling ball. And here we go. What we are going to do on the VLS ball is going to be putting 4.5 by 4 by 2 on this bowling ball. This is going to be close-ish to what we had for our dual angle layout, but it's not going to be exact. So first thing we do is grab our Storm Lightning Arc ruler. This is going to be the easiest way to do it. It actually has distances on the ruler itself. You can't use this. I will show a quick example of how you do this with a Pro Sect on this first distance, but then we're going to go back to the Lightning Arc ruler. Now, the next distance we're going to use is your PSA to PAP distance. This is going to be that 4-inch mark that we talked about earlier. Just like the pin to PAP, we're going to make an arc from that PSA, or the mass bias, up towards where that arc is for that pin to PAP distance. Now, if you're on a symmetrical ball, this is going to be a little bit different. For a symmetrical ball, you're going to make a line from your pin through your CG, through your center of gravity, all the way down to 6 3/4 inches on the ball. That is going to be your new PSA, your new mass bias, because symmetrical balls don't have this number. So you need to create it yourself. Then you'll have two different arcs on the ball that do need to intersect. If they don't intersect, you cannot use that layout. This is one of the negatives of the vector layout system, is that you actually have layouts that are not feasibly possible because the arcs just don't line up. Then you're not going to actually be accurate. That's one of the negatives of this system compared to dual angle. Dual angle you can do anything on. Vector layout system, you really can't, you're kind of limited. There's been many times where I try putting a layout on a ball and it doesn't physically work because the arcs don't ever intersect. So now you have two arcs on the ball and there should be one specific point where they intersect. You're going to make a big dot on where that intersection is, but then we're going to go to the pin buffer distance. What you're going to do here is you're going to grab your arc ruler again or your Pro Sect, and you're going to draw a large arc again from that pin out to that buffer. But it's going to be much higher than you did with your pin to PAP distance. This is going to showcase where your vertical axis line is going to be. So in the future, I'll talk about it, but what we're going to do is draw a line from the tip of that arc through wherever that dot was. But this distance gets very, very hairy. This showcases how close that pin is going to be to your VAL angle. So what you're going to do is just make that arc. The bigger the arc, the better in this one, because then you have more room to work with. And then finally, you have your pin buffer arc, and you have a dot on your ball that is a intersection between your first two arcs. What you're going to do now is find the tangential point of that arc using a lot of math terms. To put it simply, what we're going to do is just draw a line that's going to go from the dot of the arc up through the tip of the pin buffer arc. So wherever you only touch the arc one time on the pin buffer is where you're going to draw your line. Please use my example on this video to help showcase how this is. It's a little tough to explain. It's easier to see than to actually talk about. But you're going to draw then just a straight line with your Pro Sect between your pin to PAP arc and your PSA to PAP arc, and then also your pin buffer arc. And that is going to be a line that we use just like the dual angle layout system. And finally, what we are going to do is go backwards for what our positive axis point is. In this case, our positive axis point is 5 inches over by 1.5 inches up. So what we will do is, using that line, we are going to go 1.5 inches down that line and make another point. Then from there, what we'll do is we'll make a perpendicular line from that point over to the left because I'm a righty, and we'll go 5 inches over. That 5-inch point is going to be the center of our grip. We're going to draw a full line through that, and then using our center as grip, we're going to make a line again perpendicular to our center of grip line. And then we're going to use our actual hand and span numbers to figure out where our fingers and thumb are going to go. I personally have a 4.5-inch span from my middle finger to my thumb. So what I'm going to do is go up on that center of grip 2.25 inches, which is half of 4.5 inches. And then from that center of grip down, we're going to go another 2.25 inches so that we can find where that thumb is going to be. And there we go. We have our spots for our fingers and our thumb with that layout that we chose. And that is how you put a vector layout system layout on your bowling ball. This one's a little more confusing. The numbers are a little bit weirder. Once you get it down, it does end up working out. But finally, we're going to go to our no thumb bowlers, and we're going to go with our Storm 2LS layout system to be able to help you guys. Our third and final layout system is going to be the 2LS layout system. This is a layout system designed by Storm for specifically two-hand and no-thumb bowlers. No-thumb bowlers can use what we talked about previously. The biggest issue is, for a no-thumb bowler, the center of your grip is right in between your fingers because you don't have another hole on the ball. So that is where Storm actually created this 2LS layout system to better help two-handers. And in my opinion, this is the best one that has been created. There are a few smaller ones. I believe there's a PAL system from the Brunswick brands, but it just isn't as good as the 2LS system in my opinion. And from a lot of pro shops opinions as well. So let's go into the numbers for a 2LS layout. Now, the good thing about this layout system is it's very close to VLS, as the name suggests. The very first number you're going to have, because there are 3 numbers that we care about in this system, is the pin to PAP distance. Just like the other layout system, this is going to be a carbon copy, so you can skip ahead if you've heard it already. But the pin to PAP distance is the most important distance in a bowling ball layout. This is going to help determine how much flare your bowling ball is going to have. Now, the pin to PAP distance markers are just like a bell curve, where you have a point where there is maximum flare potential on the ball in the middle, and the further you get away from those middle points, the less flare your ball will have. That middle, the part where your ball is going to flare the most, is between 3.5 and 3 3/4 inches. At that point is where your ball is going to have max flare, maximum differential. So if you want your ball to hook early and hook a lot, try to stay around there. The further you get away from it, the less flare, the more down lane angle your ball can have. So if you get around the 4.5, 5, 5.5 distance points, that's when your ball is going to flare less and less and less. Generally, people stick between 3 3/4 inches and 5 1/4 inches for their bowling balls. Some stronger bowling balls, they want to have lower, weaker bowling balls, they want to have higher. Now, if you get lower than 3.5 inches, we get into what we call short pin territory. Short pin is a very niche and unique way to drill a bowling ball where it acts like a urethane ball and barely flares, but is not a urethane, is still a reactive ball. Some people really like short pin. Most people do not like them. We will not be covering them in this video section. Next up, we are going your PSA to pin distance. This is going to be a distance that is used to determine how early or how late your bowling ball is going to hook. This distance is between 1 and 6 degrees on the ball, and this is most important for an asymmetrical bowling ball. It doesn't matter very much for a symmetrical ball. It still does a little bit, but there isn't enough evidence to showcase it really matters that much. I always recommend putting your regular layout on both an asymmetrical and a symmetrical ball, assuming this number matters, and then it really is okay if it doesn't matter. But this number, the lower the number, the earlier the bowling ball is going to want to hook. So if you're around that 1 to 2 to 3 inch range, the ball wants to hook earlier. If you're around that 4 to 5 to 6 inch range, the ball wants to hook later. And now the final number is where it gets different for a 2LS layout. This is going to be your pin to center of grip, otherwise known as COG, distance. This is going to be literally a distance from between your fingers over to where the pin is. This number determines how early and how strong the bowling ball is going to be. This also changes the flare potential of your ball. So the biggest number to know here is 3 3/8 inches. If you drill this distance at 3 3/8 inches, it will keep the same exact numbers that it would have before you drilled it. The differential does not change. If this number, the higher this number gets, the higher your bowling ball's differential is going to be. That's going to make it stronger and stronger and stronger. The lower this distance is, the less your ball is going to hook in the front and the weaker your bowling ball is going to be. So if you have a ball that you want to flare more, make this number larger. This number generally goes between about 1.5 inches and upwards of 5 inches. So keep it around these numbers. 3 3/8 is what we call the middle ground. Above that is a strong layout. Below that is a weaker layout. That is what all of the numbers mean. So let's go back to the Pro Shop and put this layout on a bowling ball. The numbers we're going to use for this example are just like the VLS layout, are 4.5 by 4 by 2. And then we're going to use our same positive access point of 5 inches over by 1.5 inches up. However, this will be drilled two-handed, not with a thumb. So let's get it going. First of all, you want to grab your Storm Lightning Arc ruler. Again, you don't need it, but it does make this process a lot easier, and they are only about $20. So what we're going to do is get our 4.5 inch pin distance from our pin over to the right side of where the mass bias and the CG are. You're going to make a large arc on that 4.5 inch point. The larger the arc, the better in this case, because you're going to want to make an intersection with another arc in the future. The second step will be drawing a straight line between your pin and center of gravity if it is a symmetrical ball, or the pin and the mass bias if it is an asymmetrical ball. If it is a symmetrical ball, you're going to make this line and then 6 3/4 inches up this line, down this line, you are going to want to put a dot. That is going to be your new fake mass bias point. If you have an asymmetrical ball, you don't have to worry. You already have a mass bias. Then from here, you're going to grab your Storm Lightning Arc ruler and make another arc just like you did for the Pin-to-PAP distance, except this time at 4 inches. You're going to make a large arc at 4 inches. And your goal is to find the intersection between your Pin-to-PAP distance and your PSA to PAP distance. So you're going to want to find the intersection of those two arcs and then put a dot there. And next is where things veer away from the VLS layout system. Next, you're going to get your pin to COG distance. In our example, our distance is 2 inches. So what we're going to do is actually make an arc on the left side, on the opposite side of our pin to CG or pin to mass bias line. You're going to make a large arc at 2 inches. This is going to be very interesting. So make sure this arc is very large. We're going to have to find another point where a couple places intersect. And this is where things get really, really clunky. So this is the biggest negative with the 2LS layout system, is that you actually need a separate chart to be able to find exactly how far you're going to want to make a line between your first intersection and that pin to COG arc. So what you'll need is what's called a lightning arc chart, which is a chart that has a trillion different numbers on it. I'll be showing it on the screen right now, but it's impossible to read. I apologize for that. So what you will do here is you're going to find your positive axis point on this chart. So the top part of the chart showcases horizontal positive axis point distance, and the left side showcases the vertical positive axis point distance. So if we find mine, I'm at 5.125 inches. So what I'm going to do here is make a line between the intersection of the pin to PSA and the pin to PAP distance, get the intersection of those arcs, and we're going to draw a line straight through the arc that we made over on the pin to COG distance. We're going to make a straight line between those. When we get to 5.125 inches, we're going to stop and we're going to make an arc there. We're going to make another arc that's going to be another intersection on the left side of the bowling ball. And with that, we technically found where our fingers are going to go to a certain degree. So what we will do next is we're going to actually have to reverse engineer our positive axis point onto what this layout is going to be. So here is where it gets a little hairy. You're going to want to find a perpendicular. So for me, I'm going to backtrack. For me, I have 1.5 inches up on my positive axis point. That is what we're using here. So what I need to do is find a 1.5 inch distance point below where that first intersection of the pin to PSA and the pin to PAP is, but make sure that is still like perpendicular to that pin to COG intersection that we have. And finally, from that point, what we are going to do is draw a straight line through that pin to COG intersection arc that we have. You're going to draw a straight line from that 1.5 inches down that we just made, that 1.5 inch down point, draw it across through that, and then you will find where your fingers are going to lie. And finally, you're going to put your fingers on this with a 1/4 inch bridge, and then you are good to go to drill your fingers directly where this line is. Remember, you want to put the middle of your drill bit on this line that we just drew. If you don't, you're actually going to mess up the layout a little bit. This is meant to be the exact center of grip. So if you actually put the middle of the drill bit, the actual point of the drill bit on this line, you're going to be good to go. Again, this layout system is a little bit confusing, and apologies for that, but this is the best one that we have for two-handers and no thumb bowlers. I'd recommend watching back a few times, specifically look at the video that I'm doing to help showcase exactly how this goes. If you're somebody with a PAP that actually goes down instead of up, you're going to have to reverse that step where instead of going down with my PAP, you are going to want to go up with your PAP. But otherwise, I really hope this helps all those two-handers and no-thumb bowlers. And if you're a lefty in any of the ways that we mentioned, in any of the layouts that we mentioned, you just need to completely reverse the process, mirror the process. And finally, with that, we are completed with all 3 of the largest layout systems in bowling, what the numbers mean, and how to put them on your ball. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I will help out in any way that I can. I hope the examples that we showcased here help. I recommend using those first before trying to create your own, especially if you're newer, to see what layouts you like and what layouts you don't like. And if there's any layout systems you prefer over the others, I recommend using that one. It doesn't seem like there are any new ones coming anytime soon. These seem to be industry standards, so it's really good to know specifically dual angle because it's most used, but also knowing Storm VLS, if you're a Storm fan, can help out also. But otherwise, if you enjoyed, make sure to drop a subscription, make sure to drop a like. This video took quite a while to make. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys were troopers and watched through the entire thing, let me know in the comments. That'd be awesome if you guys were one who watched the entire video from start to finish. Otherwise, thank you. I will see you on the next one.